Hello everyone, my name is Caitlin and welcome back to my channel. So the time has finally come for us to do DCOM's part 3. It has been a long road. I started making this series over a year ago now, and it just makes me so happy to know that so many people loved it. And this final list in particular, I just hold so close to my heart. Like, I've had this list done for a while now, and it's just taking me so long to want to put it out there just because it is so personal to me. And to put it out there for people to tell me that I'm wrong for having such personal connections to these movies just seems so weird to me. But you guys, my cater tots, want to know what my top 36 Disney Channel original movies are, and so this video is for you. I hope that you enjoy it.
Thanks, Porter.
It's the least that I could do for the dude that helped align me with my infinite self.
So first up we have The Swap. This is another DCOM that is based off of a book. It follows these two high schoolers, a boy and a girl, who end up switching bodies. This movie came out quite recently, so I'm sure a lot of you are surprised to see it so high up on this list, but I just love this movie. I feel like it tackles the concept of gender norms really well, and I just feel like it's one of those movies where you watch it and you're just so pleasantly surprised by how good it is. It also stars Peyton List, which I'm sure some of you are probably thinking like, not too sure how I feel about that, because that's how I felt going into this movie, but then I thought that she did a great job, and this is also the first movie that I ever did a DCOM review for this channel, and so it has a very special place in my heart because of that. It's also just a DCOM that I can watch over and over again, and so that's why it is number 36.
Man, I am so over being cold.
Next up we have the classic Johnny Tsunami. This movie is about this boy who is from Hawaii who loves to surf, but then his dad gets this job opportunity in Vermont, and so they all move there, and then that's when he starts taking up snowboarding instead. This movie is just such a classic for me. I have so many positive memories of watching this movie when I was younger, and I feel like it still holds up to this day. It almost feels like it could be the pilot episode to like a Disney Channel show instead, just like the whole concept of this new kid adjusting to this private school and like all of the drama that surrounds it. It almost reminds me of Soy Luna. Like, I just feel like it could be a Disney Channel series instead. It's also got one of my favorite Disney Channel movie ships in it, and no, I'm not talking about Johnny and Emily, I'm talking about Johnny and Sam, because they are just very much in love. And honestly, I was a little bit sad to see Johnny Tsunami only at number 35 on this list, but that just goes to show how good the movies are on this list.
Now we are simply trying to determine what has happened to the eggs.
It's 4:23 a.m.
At number 35, we have Don't Look Under the Bed, and this movie moved around a lot on my list because it's one of those movies that you always forget how good it is until you rewatch it. This is a Halloween movie. It's about this girl who's being framed for all of these pranks by the boogeyman, and if you've never seen this movie, you're probably like, that sounds really weird, but trust me, it works. This movie is also without a doubt the scariest DCOM to date, but I don't want that to deter you from watching it because it's not like scary. It's like this type of scary that like when you're a kid you were kind of spooked by it, but then now to watch it back it's just funny to think about how you were scared of it as a kid, if that makes sense. The ship in this movie is also one of those ships where you're watching it and you're like, I ship it, but I'm not too sure if I'm supposed to ship it, and then it becomes canon and it's just adorable and you're like, oh, okay, so I'm not crazy. But yeah, this movie's really good. If you haven't seen it, just, oh my god, please go watch it like right after this video.
That was weird. We should probably get your bike out of my truck, because I got other places to go if you're not in there, man. What's going on here?
Coming in at number 33, we have Motocrossed. This movie is about a girl who takes her brother's place in a motorbiking tournament. I think that's what it's called. Motocross tournament? Dirt biking tournament? I don't remember. So it's kind of like the DCOM version of Mulan, but it's just great. I love it so much. Dean and Andy are just everything. I will say though, I don't like Dean as much as I did when I was younger. When I was rewatching, I wrote down that he reminded me of Jake Paul, and that's not exactly a good thing in my books, but they were still cute, and we did still deserve a kiss scene. Like that pool scene at the end when they're talking in front of the pool, like they should have kissed then, and that's just facts. But this movie is still really good. I would say if you haven't seen it, even if you're not really a fan of the older DCOMs, I would say to still give this one a chance because it is just a really good time.
She says he's the truth, well I'm not a believer.
So number 32, we have Let It Shine, which might be one of the most underrated Disney Channel musicals of all time, in my personal opinion. It's a retelling of this old French play where you have like the main guy who's a really talented writer, but he's super insecure, and so he uses his like conventionally attractive friend to like pose as him and like be the writer, and then the main girl falls in love with him, but she's not really in love with him, she's in love with like his words. And I feel like I explained that really weird, but it was mainly because I wanted to explain the play and the movie at the same time, so I'm not sure if I did either of them justice. But I really enjoy this movie. I love the soundtrack so much. Me and You is probably one of my favorite DCOM songs of all time. Definitely one of the best duets that Disney Channel has ever come up with. Behind Eris from Soy Luna. I love the chemistry that Roxy and Cyrus have, and I personally feel like Cyrus is more attractive than the other guy was named Chris, but maybe that's just me. But yeah, this movie is definitely one of my favorites, and so I'm sad it didn't make it into the top 30.
And that would be dishonest, right, Dad? And lying is bad, right, Dad?
So next up we have How to Build a Better Boy, and I feel like this movie might be one of the funniest decoms to date. It's about these two best friends who accidentally hack into this government organization and end up building the main girl, May, a robot boyfriend. And I feel like this movie kind of gets a bad rep, and I'm not really too sure why. It might just be a part of the whole like movement of like all new Disney Channel is bad, but this movie isn't even really new. It came out in 2014, and honestly it's really good. I really enjoy it. It stars China Anne McClain along with the girl from Lab Rats. I apologize, I do not remember her name, but the guy from True VP is also in this movie. Oh, and the girl is too. I forgot about that. She's in this movie too, but the guy from True VP is definitely one of the highlights for me. He plays May's older brother, and then he ends up having a little love story with China Anne McClain's character, and it's just everything. I love it. Oh, and also Noah Centineo's in this movie, and this is probably the only movie, or like one of the few that I've seen that he's in that I don't hate his character. Like, there's one moment at the end where he like comes out, and it's just hilarious, and I love it so much. And yeah, I just really enjoy this movie. This one's one of my favorite ones to watch with my friend Nina. It's just one of those movies you can watch over and over again, and it's just a fun time no matter what.
You have so many inside jokes. Ooh, arugula. She's gone. Okay.
So speaking of movies that I feel like get a bad rep, at number 30 we have the Freaky Friday remake, which I feel weird even calling it the Freaky Friday remake because I don't feel like that's what it is. It's more like the Freaky Friday musical adaptation, because that's what it is. It's the adaptation of the stage musical, which means we get so many good Broadway sounding songs in this movie, which is probably the main reason why I love it so much. And I feel like the main reason why it gets a bad rep is because so many people haven't seen it. They're just like, oh, they remade Freaky Friday, so it's probably bad, when it's really not. It's a completely different story from the Lindsay Lohan film, and it's just a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. My favorite songs from this one are At Last It's Me and Oh Biology, because oh my goodness, Oh Biology is just so good. This one was also one of the first decoms I did a review of on camera, and I kind of fangirled a little bit too hard over the main love interest Adam because I just thought he was so cute, but then it turns out that the actor who played him watched my review, and then he DM'd me on Instagram, and I was just like, oh my goodness, I've made it. Like, this is everything I could have hoped for. And so yeah, I have positive memories attached to this movie because of that as well. And just overall, I feel like it's such a good movie. If you haven't seen it and you're kind of curious about it, or you're like not too sure, I would say just give it a chance because it'll probably surprise you.
Hurry, Roscoe!
Next up we have Pixel Perfect, and this is one of those decoms that just always comes to mind whenever I think about like my favorite decoms or just my favorite childhood decoms. It stars Phil from Phil the Future, and he creates this hologram singer to sing for his friend Sam's band. And so the soundtrack for this movie is fire, and I really wish it was on iTunes and Spotify, and I feel like this is one of those movies that has a really big cult following. Like, it's not one of the most popular decoms of all time, but it does have some really good fans who are just so passionate about it, as we should be. The ship isn't exactly my favorite. They do the whole best friends to lovers thing, but then there's also like a love triangle with the hologram, which is like to be expected, but still a little bit weird. But yeah, besides that, it's definitely one of my favorites from like the oldies, I guess, if you can call it that.
Look, don't be like that, little bro. You like her, don't you?
Yeah.
And you didn't wash my underwear for an entire month just to let some chump jump in and steal your girl, did you?
No.
That's right.
At number 28, we have Read It and Weep. This is another decom that is based off of a book, and it's one that I really want to read. Like, it just seems like it would be so good in book form, if you know what I mean. It's about this girl named Jamie who has this journal where she writes about this girl named Iz, who is like the extension of herself. She's like her, but cooler. Like, she's got superpowers and all this stuff. And so you've got Iz as the center of the story, and then all of the other characters are people she knows from like school and her family, but they all have different names and stuff. And then of course the journal ends up getting accidentally published, and then just blows up around the town and around the world, I feel like. Like, she's on the news at one point. Like, it's a pretty big deal, almost like Twilight, I guess. I feel like I liked this movie when I was younger, but it's definitely one that I like a lot more now. Like, I just feel like the story in this movie is told so well, and again, it's just one of those decoms that I can watch over and over again and never get bored of it. I also love the ship in this movie. It's probably one of my favorite best friends to lovers story, and I also love the way that they build the relationship between Jamie and her brother, and I just feel like the concept of this movie and the movie itself was just so well done, and honestly should be a lot higher up on this list, but what's done is done.
What up, Summit Valley? It's time to ride.
Next up we have Cloud 9, which is a movie that I feel like I talk a lot about on my channel, which is probably because it has one of my favorite ships in it, which is of course Kayla and Will. It's about this girl who ends up getting kicked off of her snowboarding team, and then she has to go work at the resort's doggy daycare with Will, who is this retired snowboarder, and so she ends up convincing him into teaching her how to be a better snowboarder so that she can win the big competition at the end of the film. And even though this one isn't a Christmas movie, it's still one that I watch every year. I just feel like the winter vibes in this movie are just on point. It just puts me in the Christmas spirit. But this could also be because I feel like they air it on Disney Channel during like Christmas time a lot, which would make sense. And like I said, I just love Kayla and Will so much. They probably have the best kiss scene from any Disney Channel original movie to date. And I love their song too. Cloud 9 is just so good. It's a little bit repetitive, but it's still a fun time. And honestly, I'm surprised that this movie isn't higher up on this list, but I do find that when I rewatch it, it gets a little bit boring. So I don't know, I feel like rewatchability isn't as strong with this one, but it's still a great movie and I love it.
Afraid de manos. Afraid de manos.
Yeah.
At number 26, we have Going to the Mat, and this is one of the few movies that I watched for the first time in making this series that actually made it into the top 36 because it's just so good. I was very impressed with this movie. It's basically about this kid who is blind, who moves to this new school and takes up wrestling instead of his previous passion, music, because he doesn't want to be just another stereotype. I know what you're thinking, Caitlin, that sounds like a sports movie. I thought you didn't like those, and you would be correct. I usually don't like them, but I really love this movie. I think this is the third highest rated DCOM, like sports related DCOM on this list, so I feel like that just goes to show how much I love this movie. I'm gonna be completely honest, I don't know how accurate of a portrayal this movie is for people who are blind or people who are in the blind community. I know for a fact that the main actor is not blind. He's one of the Lawrence brothers, which I love, but also I wish that they could have cast someone who was actually blind in the lead role, because I'm sure there are lots of blind actors who would have jumped at this opportunity. They also have a face touching scene, which if I'm correct, I'm pretty sure that that is a very big myth in the blind community, so that kind of sucks. But besides that, I do really like the serious tones that this movie takes, and I feel like it does a really good job of telling the story that it presents. So I do really enjoy this movie. I think it's really good, and if you haven't seen it, I would definitely recommend checking it out.
The Diablo toys are evil!
So coming in at number 25, we have Kim Possible, the movie, so the drama. This movie was originally supposed to be the finale for the series before the fans came together and got us the 4th season, which is just amazing. And for the younger viewers that might be watching, I don't want to spoil this movie for you, so I'll just say that it's basically about Kim getting a new boyfriend and how that kind of interferes with her life. And I feel like this movie was a really good reflection of the series. Like, I feel like they were able to capture the essence of the show really well, and I just also love the story so much. And I know I just said I didn't want to give any spoilers, but I feel like anyone who has even heard of Kim Possible is familiar with the fact that Kim and Ron do get together, and so they get together by the end of this movie, and I just loved that so much as a kid. Now looking back on it, I don't know if it was developed in the best way. Like, I think it works well for the movie, but I just wish there could have been more hints towards their relationship in the show. Like, as far as the show is concerned, I feel like them getting together kind of comes out of nowhere a little bit. Like, there just wasn't enough development as I would have personally liked. But I do still need to rewatch the series from start to end to be able to come to like a real conclusion on that. And I also just feel like I have so much nostalgia attached to their relationship that it's just hard not to love them. But yeah, that's the Kim Possible movie. I love it. It's such a fun time, and I feel like everyone can agree on that.
Don't worry, brutal honesty is our specialty.
So moving on to Tru Confessions at number 24, and I just feel like first and foremost, I must say that I was just blown away by how good this movie was. It's about this girl named Tru who is making this movie about her younger brother, who I don't think that they say exactly what it is, but I believe he's somewhere on the autism spectrum. Oh, and then he's played by Shia LaBeouf, which is cool, but also it's kind of like, would have been cooler if they would have hired someone who was actually on the spectrum. But also it's Shia LaBeouf, so it's hard to hate it. This was also the first movie on the list, like in watching them in watch order from Under Wraps to this one. This was the first one that actually made me cry, just because I feel like it does a really good job of tapping into your emotions. Like, one of the things I wrote down was that they need to stop putting Eddie in all these stressful situations because it's making me stress, but then that just goes to show how stressful his life would have been like, and I feel like it really gives you a good perspective. There's also this one scene where, like, you know when you're watching a Disney Channel show or movie and the main, like, bully is being the worst and you just want them to punch them in the face, like, so bad, but you know they're not actually gonna do that? Well, there's one scene in this movie where they're standing on a bridge and the main bully is just being the worst, and me and Nina were both like, push him off the bridge, like, get rid of him, but we were like, they're not actually gonna do that. But then she actually does that. She pushes him off the bridge, and it's just a wonderful scene, probably one of my favorite scenes from any DCOM ever. So yeah, if you haven't seen this movie, definitely go watch it. Like, if you're a DCOM fan and you haven't seen Tru Confessions, like, that's not a good look for you, so go watch it.
Watch my fur dudes.
So I know what you're all thinking. You're probably like, oh my goodness, how is Invisible Sister at number 23? Whereas I'm thinking, oh my goodness, how is Invisible Sister not in the top 10? I don't think I can express to you how important this movie is to me, but I will try. It is a Halloween DCOM, my favorite Halloween DCOM ever. It stars Rowan Blanchard, who plays this girl who feels invisible, especially in comparison to her older sister, who is like super popular, and so when her science project ends up turning her older sister actually invisible, our story unfolds. And while I will say the story of this movie is a lot of fun, I always thoroughly enjoy it whenever I watch it, what really gets me about this movie is the message. No matter how many times I watch this movie, the ending will always make me cry because it just really hits close to home for me. And I'm sure it hits close to home for a lot of other people as well. It's that whole idea of feeling invisible, that you don't really have many friends, that people probably think you're weird. But then the whole message of this movie is that the only person standing in your way from being visible and being seen is yourself. You have to be able to put yourself out there, and then once you do, you'll probably be surprised by what comes from it. And I always think to myself, man, if only I watched this movie in high school. But I did. Like, I remember watching it and it didn't really change anything, but I still think that the message is so true, and it's something I think about often if I ever get like nervous about certain social situations or about putting myself out there, that like the only only person who's really focusing in on my every movement is myself. Other people are just thinking about themselves, you know? And so I'm surprised that this is the only decom that's really ever been made about this topic, because I feel like it's so relevant, especially today. And so yeah, that's why I love this movie so much. I mean, it also has one of my favorite decom ships. Cleo and Carter are just so adorable. Like, that honeypot scene is so good. And so yeah, I love this movie a lot, and I'll forever hold it very close to my heart.
Cilantro and a little bit of lemon dressing on the side with some of those oyster crackers.
So next up, we have a pretty iconic decom, I would say. We've got Cadet Kelly at number 22. This movie stars Hilary Duff, and to really simplify the plot, it's basically about her going to military school. This movie is super nostalgic for me. I was a big Hilary Duff fan growing up, and so this is one of the few movies I had on DVD, which meant that I would watch this movie a lot growing up. And for some reason, when I went to rewatch it for this series, I thought that it wouldn't be as good as I remembered, but boy was I wrong. I feel like this movie really holds up. I like how it deals with divorce and the introduction of new parents. I remember being younger and just seeing how, like, civil the family was, like how they would invite the ex-husband over for dinner, and as a kid I just was like, that's not how divorce is really like. But I understand now that everyone's blended family looks different, and so it's nice to see a healthy one portrayed on screen. Not to say that my family isn't healthy, it's just different. Like, I don't know, I wouldn't invite my dad over to my mom's house for dinner, but also if we were at like an event and my dad and mom had to sit beside each other, it also wouldn't be a big deal, you know? But everyone's different. And of course, this movie also has one of my favorite non-canon ships. Jennifer and Kelly are just so in love, and I love them so much. One thing I will say though is, like, is Kelly looking at staying at military school long term? Like, she seems more into like fashion and that sort of stuff, so like, I don't know. Like, I find it weird that she would go to a military school if she didn't want to like be in the military afterwards. Like, why didn't they just find another school in the district? Maybe it's because like her stepdad was the head person of the military school, and so they wanted her there because of that. Actually, I think that that is the reason. But still, I just couldn't help being like, I don't know, it's a weird choice for her education if she's not planning on actually like being in the military. But yeah, that's just me thinking too much into everything as per usual.
I work at a stable. You know, horses. It's kind of cool. Do you want to check it out?
No, thanks.
Suit yourself.
Coming in at number 21, we have the classic that is Zenon. And if you haven't seen Zenon for some strange reason, it's basically this movie that takes place in the future. It's about this girl who lives on the space station, but then she gets grounded. And by grounded, I mean literally grounded. She gets sent down to Earth to live with her aunt for a bit. And this movie has been one of my favorites for a while now, even though I didn't grow up with it. Like, I only watched it for the first time when I was like 14 or 15, but it's been one of my favorites ever since. And I just love the story of this movie so much. I remember watching it for the first time and just being like, wait, why are we going down to Earth? Like, why are we leaving this cool setting to go down to boring Earth? But then I realized quite early on in this movie that it wasn't the setting that made it so cool, but it was Zenon herself. She was the heart of this movie, but also the cool factor at the same time. Like, I just love her so much as a character. But yeah, I love Zenon. I love Zenon and Greg. I'm sad that we didn't get to see them develop further throughout the other two movies, but we still had this movie, which is what matters.
Ha! Beat that, baby! Oh, be quiet.
So next up we have The Color of Friendship, and I'm sure most Disney Channel fans are familiar with this movie. It basically takes place in the 70s. You have two girls, one from South Africa, one from the United States, who both decide to participate in this exchange program, which brings Mari, the girl from South Africa, to the US to live with Piper. And then when she gets there, they're both shocked to find out the race of one another. I feel like this movie, Going to the Mat, and Tru Confessions are probably the three most important decoms ever made, and I'm sure if anyone else were to make this list, they would probably have them up in the top 10. But for me, when I think about my personal favorite decoms, I think about the musicals, I think about the ones I have a personal attachment to, and so I don't know, I felt the need to explain myself as to why I had these movies maybe a little bit farther back on my list than they should be, and so that's the reasoning behind that. But they are still a part of my best decoms list because that's where they should be. They are some of the best decoms ever made. But I feel like The Color of Friendship is such an important movie. It handles racism in ways that movies like Descendants or Zombies never could, and so I feel like it made my top 20. If you haven't seen it, please go watch it. If you haven't seen any of these movies that made my top 20, go watch them because I feel like it just shows how good they are. I love The Color of Friendship a lot, and I feel like it, I don't know, it doesn't get talked about enough as it should.
Your mother was an extraordinary bubble area.
I think out of all of the movies that I watched for the first time in making this series, this is the one that I'm the most happy about watching. I just completely fell in love with this movie, and I just wish they would have aired it on Family Channel when I was younger because I know if I would have seen it, I just would have loved it. Stepsister from Planet Weird is about this girl whose mom starts dating this new guy, and so when she meets him and her daughter, she can't help feel like they're a little bit weird, like there's something not quite right about them. Are they aliens? I don't know, I guess you gotta go watch the movie and find out. Even just talking about this movie makes me want to go and rewatch it because it's just so good. Like, I love the relationship that builds between not just the two daughters, but both families overall. The ships in this movie are also on point. We don't really see much of them, but there's this one part near the end that I'm just all about. There's also this one scene that I really don't want to spoil for anyone who hasn't seen it, but it's with Megan's little brother and Cosmo, who is her new stepdad, and I'm sure anyone who has seen this movie knows exactly what I'm talking about, but this scene is just so well done. It's one of the first ones that come to mind whenever I think about this movie. It makes me emotional every time, and yeah, I just can't get over how good it is. This movie is also based off of a book. I haven't gotten a chance to read it yet, but I'm sure I will one day, and it's funny because I didn't grow up with this movie, but I just still have such a strong attachment to it, and I know it will be one of my favorites for the rest of my days.
I love the glitter.
Speaking of movies that I know are just gonna be one of my favorites forever, next up we have Go Figure. When I tell you I love this movie, I feel like I really just can't put into words how much I love this movie. It's about this girl who is a figure skater, but then she ends up going to the school on a hockey scholarship, but then it's obviously much more than that. The ship in this movie is everything. Caitlin and Spencer are just one of my favorites. I used to watch this movie a lot growing up, and so I have a very nostalgic attachment to it, but it's also one of those movies I can go back to and it still holds up to this day. Well, except for the body double. The skating body double wasn't the best, but that's okay. Also, the main character is named Caitlin. It is spelled a little bit weird, but I still feel like I'm partial to this movie because of that, and so yeah, just overall, I love this movie. It's such a good time. If you haven't seen it, definitely go watch it. I guarantee you will not be disappointed.
Yeah, and I'm way too tasty. I'm always looking like a snack.
So next up we have Zombies 2, and some of you might be surprised to see this movie so high up on my list, but honestly, I love Zombies 2, like, a lot. It's basically the sequel to Zombies, except for now there's werewolves and... Sorry, I was trying to think of the actual plot of this movie and I blanked. But there's a presidential election, Addison's trying to figure out more about her past, and also the werewolves are like dying, so there's a lot going on. And I won't be going too in depth about my thoughts on Zombies 2 because I did make a whole review on it, so you can go watch that afterwards if you would like. But to basically summarize why I love this movie so much, it's just that the characters are great, the soundtrack's poppin', the ships, nah. No, that's not true. I like Zed and Addison. They're pretty cute, and the non-canon ships are definitely on point. As far as the songs go, I think that Call to the Wild is probably my favorite one from the movie. It goes so hard, and I love it. I feel like this movie is such a step up from the previous one. Like, the themes that they touch on in this movie are just done so much better, and I just love this movie a lot. And so, yep, number 17, I think.
Can somebody put a stop to the madness, please?
So next up, we have the Even Stevens movie, and I mean, did you expect anything less from me? Like, it's a masterpiece. The Even Stevens movie follows the Even Stevens family going on a trip to an island, but we soon come to find out that they're actually starring on a reality show, and chaos ensues. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't really watch Even Stevens growing up. Like, it wasn't really my show of choice. I definitely preferred Lizzie McGuire, but the movie is where it's at. And I'm realizing now that I might have to take back what I said earlier about How to Build a Better Boy being probably one of the funniest DComs of all time, because I feel like it definitely comes second to the Even Stevens movie because this movie is just hilarious and it's so good. Also, what can I say? I love the ship in this movie. Their storyline is just top notch. Ren and the dude from the island, I cannot remember his name, but they were just so cute and I loved them. And so yeah, I just feel like the Even Stevens movie is so good. Definitely one of the best Disney Channel movies to come from a series, for sure. What? Coming in at number 15, we have Jump In. And Jump In is another one of those movies that I feel like you forget how good it is until you rewatch it. It stars Corbin Bleu. He plays this boxer who starts getting into double dutch, and now that I'm thinking about it, it is quite similar to High School Musical, but I feel like in a more mature way. I just feel like they dealt with more heavier themes in this movie, and it was just overall so good. The ship is also pretty cute too. I love their banter, but I also just love the relationship that Izzy builds with the double dutch team as a whole. Also, the whole plot twist with like who was telling the story of the movie at the end just like blew my mind as a kid. Also, Push It to the Limit is just such a banger. Also, the song Jordan Pruitt did for the movie Jump to the Rhythm is also just so good, and Keke Palmer's song It's My Turn Now is also a bop, and I feel like they always get overshadowed by Push It to the Limit, but they deserve more love. But yeah, overall Jump In is great, and I'm sure you all understand why it made the top 15.
And the label has a problem with that, which means we have a problem with that.
Actually, I don't really have a problem with that.
I feel so weird now that we're getting into like the main DComs that everyone's been waiting for, but yeah, number 14, we've got Camp Rock. I'm sure if you're watching this, you've probably seen Camp Rock and are probably pretty surprised that it didn't make the top 10, but this is where it is. But to really simplify the plot, it's basically about this girl who goes to a music camp, and the Jonas Brothers are there. Actually, it's just Joe. The other two brothers aren't really in this movie. And I feel like in terms of like the most popular DComs, I wouldn't say that Camp Rock is one of my go-tos, but every time I do rewatch it, I always have such a good time. I love seeing the Jonas Brothers. I love the soundtrack. My favorite song is probably the acoustic version of This Is Me, and I will say that even to this day, I have a hard time watching the confrontation scene when her lie kind of is brought to the surface. But besides that, I love watching this movie. It's such a fun time, and so that's why it is number 15, 14? I think we're at 14. Yep, love it. Next one.
Your shoe's untied. Don't trip.
Up next, we've got Princess Protection Program. This movie stars Selena Gomez and Demi Lovato. Demi plays a princess, and she needs to be protected. I feel like this one is a fan favorite, and for good reason, because it's just such a good movie. I remember when this one came out, it was just such a big deal because Demi and Selena were best friends in real life at the time, and then now they were going to be in a movie together, and it was like, what? And then I also never thought about this until making this channel and seeing people comment about them, but Carter and Rosie, I can see it. I feel like they're maybe a little bit in love. And then we also got One and the Same from this movie, which is just such a good song. And I think my only complaint about this movie is Carter's plan at the end. Like, what was it? She was just like, oh, I'll have him think that I'm Rosie, and then what? Like, he'll just kidnap you? Like, what is your plan here? Younger me was very intrigued by this whole plot line, and I don't think I really thought too much into it, but now rewatching it, I just can't help but be like, okay, but like, what was your plan? Like, what were your next steps? Like, if Carter's dad wasn't there, like, then what, you know? Like, just bad plan, 0 out of 10. Overall, though, this movie is so fun, and I love it. It's super nostalgic, and I just feel like we need more decoms about princesses, because they're so much fun.
Gabriella.
Okay, so now I feel like we're gonna get a little bit controversial. We've got High School Musical at number 12. I know, don't come for me. You guys know about High School Musical. It's about a high school that's having a musical, and it's also a musical. And then you've got the math geek and the jock, and they both share a mutual love for theater. Vent each other. I'm gonna be completely honest, running a YouTube channel for over 4 years now about Disney Channel has made me a little bit sick of High School Musical, but still to this day, whenever I sit down to watch it, I'm reminded as to why it is the phenomenon that it is. The message that they told in High School Musical about doing what you love and being yourself and not worrying about conforming to society is one that I think they've definitely tried to replicate in other decoms, but I think there's no argument in saying that it was handled the best in High School Musical. My personal favorite takeaway from this movie is something that I've talked a little bit about in my Upside Down Magic review, but it's just the whole concept that you don't need to be defined by one thing. You're not just a jock or a mathlete, like your interests don't need to define who you are, just do whatever makes you happy, you know? Which is actually one of the main reasons why I don't like the whole thing of everyone saying that Sharpay was actually the real victim of this movie, because I feel like that goes against the whole lesson that you don't need to just be defined by one thing. Like, I think that Sharpay could have learned something from Troy and Gabriella, and the fact that she doesn't need to just be defined by theater. Like, I think it would have been interesting if she would have branched out into some other stuff, but I guess she kind of did in the second movie with golf. And then of course the soundtrack's great. My favorite song from this movie is probably Troy and Gabriella's version of What I've Been Looking For. And then I guess Troy and Gabriella are cute sometimes, and yeah, I don't know. That's High School Musical. It's a fun movie. It's a classic. It's probably a lot of people's favorite decom, and I understand why. And so that is why it is my number 12.
What is that?
Oh, that's a little Chad action figure. No. Well, minus the head. Sounds like an improvement. Excuse me.
So I know I'm gonna get comments saying, like, I can't believe you put the Descendants movies above High School Musical, but I can't really explain why until I get to the first movie, so you'll have to wait a little bit for that explanation. But Descendants 2 is the sequel to Descendants, obviously. It follows Mal being unsure about her new place in Oregon. She doesn't really feel like she fits in, and so she flees back to the Isle, and everyone's gotta go back and get her. And I feel like this movie is a lot of people's favorite Descendants movie, and I get why. I feel like it's a really good sequel. I love how they expanded the universe in this movie, and we got to see more of the Isle. I also feel like they developed the characters a lot further, and they really fleshed them out more. Also, Villain Ben, yes please. I would say go watch my review on this movie if you want to know a little bit more about my thoughts on it, but it got taken down because of copyright, so I guess you can't go watch my review on it. And I feel like it's hard to talk about how much I love this movie without spoiling where I have Descendants on my list, and so I'll just say that the soundtrack is amazing. It's probably the best one out of all 3 movies. I love the addition of the new characters. I felt like they really added to the plot without taking away from the existing characters. I don't like how Ben and Mal were kind of on the rocks throughout this whole movie because it meant that we didn't get as many cute moments from them as I would have liked. And then we also didn't get a Ben and Mal duet, which I feel like we deserved in the second movie. And I feel like some people have said that we never got a duet from them because Mitchell Hope isn't the best singer, but also they could have just used Jeff Lewis's voice like they did for Did I Mention. So I still don't understand and I still don't get it, but either way, I kind of blame Descendants 2 for it because I feel like if they weren't fighting, we would have gotten a song. But also, Troy and Gabriella get a song in the second movie and they're fighting, so what's your excuse? I don't like it. They deserved a duet. But the ending of the movie is so good with their kisses on the boat, and also just like that whole ending in general I feel like is the best ending from all 3 of the Descendants movies. And yeah, I just love Descendants and this movie, and so that's why it is number 11. Alright, so we've made it to my top 10, and so at number 10 I have Phineas and Ferb the movie, Across the Second Dimension, and all I have to say is that this movie is a cinematic masterpiece. It's basically about Phineas and Ferb going to an alternate dimension, and in that dimension, the alternate version of Doofenshmirtz has power over the tri-state area. And I actually never watched this movie growing up. Like, I remember when it came out, but I just didn't really have interest in it, and so I never actually watched it. But then a few years ago when I was working at Disney, I made this one friend who was a really big fan of like Disney Channel animation and Phineas and Ferb in particular, and so I was like, you know what, I need to watch this movie. How have I never seen this movie before? And so I sat down and watched it, and I was just blown away by how good it was, and just I could not believe that I had never seen it before because it's just so good. I also feel like it's up there with Even Stevens and How to Build a Better Boy, with being one of the funniest DComs of all time. And then also the soundtrack is so good. The whole story of this movie I just feel like is played out so well. Like, it doesn't even feel like I'm watching a DCom. It feels like it should have been theatrically released, which apparently it was in Spain, which is really cool. Also, I've never really been the biggest Phineas and Isabella fan. Like, yeah, I ship them, but I also find them to be a little bit boring. But the ending of this movie when they kiss is just everything. It's so well done. Yeah, I love this movie. It's really good. If you haven't seen it, I feel like me just saying it's good doesn't really do it justice, so please, please go watch it.
No, why would I put you in charge of these communist?
Next up, we have the Wizards movie at number 9. And this movie, I can confidently say without a doubt, is the best Disney Channel movie to come from a series, like by far. Hands down, the best one, at least in my opinion. This movie follows the Russos going on a family vacation in which Alex accidentally casts a spell which makes her parents forget each other. And so this means the kids kind of got to scramble to figure out how to fix this before they cease to exist. And you might be thinking that that's a bit of a basic plotline, like it almost seems like it's been done before. And it has been done before, even on the show itself, but with Justin instead of their parents. But it's still done so well here, and honestly this movie is so much more than that. This movie definitely wasn't one of my favorite DComs growing up. Like, I think I only saw it maybe once or twice. Don't get me wrong, I liked it, but it wasn't a musical and there wasn't any ship, so I was kind of meh about it. So going back and rewatching it, I wasn't too sure how I would feel about it, but I was honestly just blown away by how good this movie was. I just feel like their characters and their relationships with one another were explored so well in this movie. There's one scene in particular with Teresa that just gets me every time. It's so well done, and I just love this movie so much. I feel like it adds to the story of Wizards of Waverly Place really well.
That's good at eating your vegetables if you can't have dessert.
Strong bones and teeth.
Coming in at number 8, we have the Cheetah Girls, and I just feel like this movie is a classic, so I'm sure you're all very familiar with it, but to give you a very rough summary, it's basically about this girl group who is trying to win their high school talent show. And this movie is one of the first DComs to have a bigger focus on music, and so one of the only notes I wrote down while watching this movie was just, I love music, because I really do. It's why I keep bringing up musicals throughout this whole video. The soundtrack is amazing. I think my favorite song from this movie is probably Cinderella, but I also really like Together We Can. I also feel like the themes in this movie were just done so well, especially with Dorinda and Chanel specifically, and I just feel like the friendship that the girls had with one another was so realistic and well developed, and so yeah, I love this movie, and it's my number 8.
That was great, Chris. Take 5.
Thanks guys, that was great. Let's take a break.
So we have Starstruck at number 7, and I feel like a lot of people will really understand this placement and other people really won't, because I feel like there is a pretty big fan base for Starstruck. But for me personally, this movie is just one of those movies where you watch it and you're just like, oh, like this is my childhood fantasy. Like this is it in a movie. It's basically a fan fiction, like that's what this movie is. You got your ordinary girl and your pop star, they're haters to lovers, and it's a great time. And I feel like out of all of the movies that have tried to do this plotline, and trust me, I've seen a lot of them, in my personal opinion, none of them have lived up to Starstruck. I just feel like the characters are great, they're realistic while still playing into the archetype sort of characters that they are. The soundtrack is incredible, Sterling Knight really gave it his all. Obviously I love Hero, but another favorite of mine is Got to Believe. They also portrayed their relationship really well, like they both have so much chemistry and such good banter with one another. I've definitely mentioned this before, but I will say again that Jessica does bug me at times, but it's also like, what would you do in her place, you know? Overall, I just love this movie so much, and it definitely has a very special place in my heart.
Cool. We're Ella.
On the run from Johnny Law.
Naughty Ned!
So at number 6, we have Minutemen, and Minutemen is just one of those movies that just can't be topped. I know it's number 6, so technically it has been topped in this list, but also in my mind, like, nothing tops Minutemen. It's basically about these high schoolers who become time travelers, like, what's not to love? I can't even tell you the amount of people I've met who have told me that Minutemen is their favorite DCom of all time, but also I understand why, because it's just so good. I love the storyline in this movie and just how they handle bullying and popularity. I love Virgil and Steph so much. They're another one of my favorite friends to lovers storylines, if they even really classify as that. And also just Virgil specifically, I feel like his character development in this movie is just so well done. Also just the cast of this movie is so great. Like you got Jason Dolly, Chelsea Kane, Nicholas Braun, Luke Benward, the principal from Phil the Future, and then that other guy's from stuff too. Like, it's just so good. I feel like if someone doesn't have Minutemen in their top 10 DComs, like, I don't trust them, you know? Also, Run It Back Again is a great song.
You guys, Chuchi is talking to Barcelona! What is this?
Coming in at number 5, we have the Cheetah Girls 2, which is in my own personal opinion the second best DCOM sequel of all time. And also apparently the 5th best DCOM of all time. So yeah, this is the sequel to the Cheetah Girls. It basically follows the girls going off to Spain for another talent competition. I feel like this movie, along with High School Musical 2 and Descendants 2, all did a really good job of taking the original world, characters, and story and just amplifying it and making it better. I feel like Cheetah Girls 2 is just everything I want in a DCOM. Like, you got great characters, awesome songs, a really cool setting, then you've also got some romance in there too, which I just love. I will say that it does kind of suck that we never find out if they do win the talent competition by the end of it, but I guess that's like an artistic choice or whatever. I'm surprised I don't have much else to say about this movie besides, like, it's great, but like, am I wrong though? Like, you're gonna look at me and tell me that I'm wrong? She wore a crown and came down in a bubble, dog. Anyways, yeah. That's Cheetah Girls 2. Let's move on.
So you play the guitar?
I know.
I feel so weird now that we're like really getting down to the wire. Like, I feel like I've kept my opinions on these movies a secret for so long. But anyways, at number 4 we have Teen Beach Movie. This movie is about a couple, Brady and Layla, getting accidentally transported into a 60s teen beach movie. This movie came out when I was around 14, and so it was that age where like I was trying to grow up and figure out what I liked, and so it was that annoying age where anything they played on Disney Channel sucked just because I wasn't watching it anymore. And so I never really watched it until a few years later when I found my way back to Disney Channel and everything was right in the world again, and I just fell in love with this movie. I feel like the concept of this movie is one of the strongest ones to ever come from Disney Channel. It's so much more complex than like a High School Musical, for example, but I still feel like they handle it so well. The soundtrack to this movie I just feel like is the embodiment of summer. It's just bop after bop. My personal favorite is probably Cruisin' for a Bruisin'. Sorry, I'm basic, but I also really like Meant to Be, which I guess it's probably also a basic answer. I think the only thing I don't like about this movie is the villains. I just think that they're a bit too cartoony, but they do make for a good finale, so I understand why they're there. But everything else about this movie I love. The story, the characters, the costumes, the ships, more importantly, the non-canon ships, if you know what I mean. But yeah, if you don't like Teen Beach Movie, I don't get you. Get over it. It's a good movie. So I feel like we've reached the general population's favorite. Like, I feel like Watch Mojo would probably have this movie at number 1, and that is of course High School Musical 2. It's basically the sequel to High School Musical, but it's summertime, which on the surface is a pretty basic plot line, but it works because High School Musical is a fundamentally basic series. High School Musical 2 was such a moment for me and everyone else when it came out. Like, it broke records. I honestly don't think it will ever be topped. Not that it is a competition, but I just think it is really interesting to see everything that High School Musical 2 accomplished for the network. And this movie is still just so much fun to rewatch. There's never a dull moment. And just like with Teen Beach, I feel like the soundtrack is so well done. There's never a dull moment. My personal favorite song from High School Musical 2 is probably Every Day or Bet on It. I love both of those songs so much. And I kept going back and forth between having High School Musical 2 or Teen Beach Movie above one another, and so I've ended up having High School Musical 2 beat Teen Beach Movie, and I honestly don't know if I agree with that, but I've already committed, so let's move on.
All right, look, guys, I got one. Let me just find it. Oh. When?
Alright, so at number 2 we have Lemonade Mouth. This is the one that I think is the current fandom's favorite. Like, I think if I were to do like a top 10 DCOMs video as voted for by you guys, which is a video I want to do in the near future, I think that Lemonade Mouth would win. And I thought that going into this series that Lemonade Mouth would be my number 1, but turns out it's not. Lemonade Mouth is about a high school band of misfits who end up making it big. No, that's... I don't know why I was confused for a second, because, like, yeah, that's what it's about. I personally think that this movie has grown to become the fan favorite just because of the themes it deals with. You've got all of these different characters who each have their own interesting backstory and just real depth to them. They're all going through their own things, which I feel like makes for a more realistic story and really makes you root for them as a band. And then not to mention the soundtrack. Every song on this album is so good. Even the Mudslide Crush songs are bangers. My personal favorites are Turn Up the Music and Livin' on a High Wire, but they really are just all so good. I feel like this movie is probably the most mature and just well done DCOM to date, and I feel like that's partly because of the book it's based off of, which I have read and I just absolutely loved it. So if you are a fan of the movie, I would highly recommend checking out the book as well. But that is all I have to say for Lemonade Mouth. So let's move on to my number 1 DCOM.
Let's continue. You find a vial of poison. Do you A? Put it in the king's wine.
Alright, so Descendants. I feel like I'm probably disappointing a lot of people with this result, but I also feel like anyone who knows me is just not surprised at all. I'm sure you've probably heard about Descendants, so I'm just going to summarize it in saying it's a movie about the children of famous Disney animated movie characters. It follows 4 main villain kids, and that's really all you need to know. So let me take you back in time a little bit. 2015, Caitlin is in high school and she's developed this love for Disney movies. You might even call her a Disney fan. And so she's found out about this new dcom that is coming out that is kind of like a spin-off to Disney movies. And so one late night after it's been leaked online, she decides to give it a chance. And I'm gonna stop talking in third person now as that's getting confusing. And so I watched it that night and I just completely fell in love with it. And so when I think back to what my high school experience was like, Descendants is one of the first things that comes to mind for me because it was the fandom that I was in at the time. It was like my thing. And so after watching Descendants, I just felt like I needed more. And so I started watching Liv and Maddie and other decoms I hadn't seen. And so yeah, Descendants is what got me back into loving Disney Channel again. Like without Descendants, this channel wouldn't even exist. So yeah, Descendants is super important to me. And I thought that going into this series, Lemonade Mouth would be my #1 because I've been saying for years that Lemonade Mouth is my favorite decom. But then after watching them all, like once we got to Descendants, there's nothing like that feeling I have when watching it. It's my favorite thing, and it's funny, it only came out 5 years ago, but it's still so nostalgic for me. My favorite song from this movie is If Only. It's probably my favorite song from all of the Descendants overall, and I just love the characters so much. I love the concept. I feel like it's the coolest concept Disney Channel has ever came up with, and I love the ships. I love Ben and Mal in the first movie. They're just everything to me. And so yeah, that's Descendants. It's my personal favorite decom of all time, but I want to know what your favorite decom is. Don't forget to let me know in the comments down below. I can't wait to read all about it. Thank you guys so much for being so patient, and just your love and support towards this series means the world to me. And so yeah, I love you guys. You're the best. And so that is all I have to say for today, Cater Tots. I hope you'll have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you very, very soon. I'm literally wearing Property of Dove Cameron on my sweater. Like, you should not be surprised. Lean on me. I don't know why I'm punching. Lean on me as I punch you in the face. Okay.